This is Limelight America. Here's your host, Michael Drew Shaw.
Thank you, Lynette, and welcome to Limelight America, where we present one-on-one personal conversations with interesting people from all walks of life. These up-close encounters with people of the fascinating and inspiring kind include business, entertainment, sports, and artistic entrepreneurs, scholars, role models, and philanthropists who impact the quality of life for us all. During the Civil War, the Sanitary Commission, which eventually became the Red Cross, hired a Pittsburgh cork maker to supply corks for medicine bottles. Years later, when a huge scandal developed over suppliers who padded profits by delivering inferior goods to the military, the cork maker, Thomas Armstrong, was singled out as the only honest man among a gang of ruthless profiteers. When caps began replacing corks, Honest Tom pulled up stakes and went into the linoleum business, a logical choice since cork was a major ingredient in floor covering. Armstrong Floors and Ceiling Tiles, born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and known worldwide. Proof that nice guys don't always finish last.
We believed from the start that if we brought the customer quality merchandise at the right price and offered excellent service, we could change retailing in the United States. Today, we are the model of what retailing should be. Bernie Marcus.
In 1978, when co-founders Bernie Marcus and Arthur Blank stated they wanted to make Home Depot the Sears Roebuck of the home improvement industry, a lot of people laughed at them. But no one's laughing anymore. By combining the convenience and service of mom-and-pop hardware stores with the low prices and huge product selection of warehouse outlets, this dynamic do-it-yourself duo transformed a few ragtag stores into the largest home improvement retailer in the U.S. The tale of how Marcus and Blank created their hardware empire ranks as one of the greatest entrepreneurial comeback stories of all time. In the late 1970s, they were both officers in a Southern California home center chain called Handy Dan, when turnaround artist Sanford S. Sigaloff took over Handy Dan's ailing parent company, Dalen Incorporated. The corporate raider was notorious for gutting senior management, but as Marcus writes in the duo's autobiography, Built from Scratch, Handy Dan made so much money that we thought Sigaloff would be stupid to get rid of us. They thought wrong. In 1978, citing trumped-up charges that they had allowed an underling to create a fund that was improperly used to fight a union at Handy Dan stores in San Jose, California, Sigaloff did indeed fire Marcus and Blank. Before they were let go, Marcus and Blank had begun experimenting with discounting in one Handy Dan outlet. They observed that when they marked down items, volume increased and costs as a percentage of sales decreased. They had planned to expand the experiment to other Handy Dan stores, but now they decided to use that plan to strike out on their own. Envisioning a nationwide chain of warehouse stores filled with a wide assortment of products at the lowest possible prices and staffed with trained associates giving absolutely the best customer service in the industry, Blank and Marcus set up shop in two defunct Treasure Island discount stores in suburban Atlanta. With an infusion of cash from a New York City investment firm, they stocked the shelves with 18,000 different items, from paint to plumbing fixtures, slashed prices to the bone, and personally hired and trained the staff. On opening day, they gave their kids a wad of $1 bills and stationed them by the entrance to hand out the money as a thank you gift for shoppers. They expected the money to run out before noon. But by 5 or 6 in the evening, our kids were out in the parking lot stopping people and giving them money to come into the store, Blank recalls. It was a crushing disappointment. When Marcus and Blank met for lunch the next day, they just sat there in stunned silence. It looked like curtains for us, Marcus remembers. My wife wouldn't let me shave for days. She didn't want me to have a razor in my hands. Fortunately, day 3 brought a glimmer of hope when a satisfied customer returned to the store with a bag of okra for Marcus, her way of saying thank you for the positive shopping experience she'd had at the Home Depot. While the transplanted New Yorker admits he really didn't appreciate the okra on a culinary level, He did see it as a sign that the fledgling enterprise was on the right track, and it was. Word of mouth began to pull more and more first-time customers to the stores, and before long, the days of paying suppliers straight from the cash register were over. Inspired by the success of their first 2 stores, Marcus and Blank decided to open 2 more stores. Cash was still a little short in those early days, so they had employees stack empty cardboard boxes and paint cans on top shelves to make the store look more full. The partners' next venture was into the Miami market, where they opened 2 stores in September and 2 more in November of 1981. On November 22nd, they took the company public, and both investments and profits soared. Originally projecting sales of $9 million per store, the founders and investors were delighted to see average sales exceed $17 million. Over the next few years, the company exploded with growth, and in less than a decade, there were 118 Home Depot outlets, ringing up $2.7 billion in sales. One of the main reasons for Home Depot's phenomenal success, and what has separated it from other discounters, is the company's mission to make a Mr. or Ms. Fix-It out of someone who thinks about calling the plumber to change the bathwater. From the very beginning, Marcus and Blank's aim was to demystify the mechanics of plumbing, electrical wiring, and construction. To this end, the founders staffed their stores with knowledgeable salespeople who could answer shoppers' questions and guide them to the proper equipment. They also began offering free clinics on all aspects of home remodeling and repair. Another secret of Marcus and Blank's success is their running scared management philosophy. We spend very little time talking about the things we are doing well. We spend 80 to 90% of our time focusing on the issues and problems, what the competition is doing, what our customers are looking for, what they are not finding in our stores, which stores are having problems. The whole focus of the company is to take today's standards and accept them for what they are, but to say we have to improve upon them for the future.
Jim Henson started his brilliant 34-year career in 1954 on a morning TV show in Washington, D.C. when he was still in high school. The show needed a part-time puppeteer, so Henson fashioned a hand puppet out of an old green coat and 2 ping-pong balls. It turned out to be the forerunner of the now famous Sesame Street characters. Henson once said, "Nobody creates a fad, it just happens." People love going along with the idea of a beautiful pig. At the heart of his success was the warmth and consideration the Muppets showed for each other, a wonderful example for children and adults alike in the often crude and cynical age we live in today.
According to The Ultimate Game Show, one of the nation's premier game show production companies, game shows are part of the fabric of our society. Well, that's really no surprise, is it? Game shows have been on the air since the birth of radio. They were also some of the first programs ever televised. For years, millions of families have gathered around their television sets each night to watch Jeopardy and The Wheel of Fortune, 2 of the longest-running game shows in history. Our guest today is Matthew King from Game Show America. And we begin with a little history. Herb Stempel's scripted loss on the $64,000 question to the more popular Charles Van Doren occurred on December 5, 1956. It involved his deliberately getting the answer to a question about an Academy Award-winning movie wrong. The correct answer was Marty, which was one of Stempel's favorite movies. After his loss, Stempel blew the whistle, but it wasn't until August of 1958 that his credibility was restored. By October of that year, the story was everywhere. The ratings were down, and the networks were denying everything. Still, many shows were canceled. In the 1950s, because of rigged game shows, many contestants' reputations were ruined. Charles Van Doren, who had become a regular on NBC's The Today Show, lost his job. He was forced to resign his professorship at Columbia University. He took a job as an editor at Encyclopedia Britannica, earning about 20% of what he'd been making on Today, and continued working as an editor and writer until his retirement in 1982. Host Jack Barry and his partner producer Dan Enright suffered the most from scandals as a result of the rigging of a game show called 21. Barry and Enright would resume their partnership in 1976. Their squeaky clean game shows, including Tic-Tac-Dough and The Joker's Wild, resulted in millions of dollars of revenue. and what was even better, forgiveness from the public for their involvement in the scandals. Our next guest on Limelight America, a gentleman I've had the pleasure of meeting and working with on one occasion, Matthew King. Who are you now, and what are you doing with your life?
My background is in education and entertainment. I was a disc jockey a number of years ago. My primary occupation was a teacher. Today, basically, I am still a teacher, but in an entirely different way. I'm a producer. We produce game shows and corporate events for different companies around the country. When I started the company, I was teaching at a middle school, and we were doing a little game show in the classroom for test reviews, and I thought, what if I took this into corporate America? What would happen? And we've done game shows and corporate events in 35 of the 50 states, Canada, Puerto Rico, Mexico.
Quiz shows all but disappeared in the early 1960s from primetime American television. Many shows adopted limits on the number of games a player could win. Quiz shows became game shows, shifting focus from knowledge to puzzles and word games. A quiz for big money would not return until ABC showed 100 grand. That was in 1963. 10 years later, the big money jackpots were on a rise again with the success of the Pyramid series, starting with the $10,000 Pyramid. 11 years later came the Alex Trebek-hosted revival of Jeopardy, with its own increased dollar amounts.
Fascinating people, up close and personal. This is Limelight America with Michael Drew Shaw.
Welcome back. We're with Matthew King, host from Game Show America.
Our first big show, we were competing, this was in 2001, and it had taken us basically 5 years of kind of evolving what we wanted to do larger events. In 2001, we got a first big bite down in Florida, and we were competing against Art James Productions. He was a pioneer in game shows, CBS game show host for a number of years, host over a dozen different game shows that were on television. When you got Art James, you knew you were getting a TV personality. Mm-hmm. Well, this first show we got in Florida, we actually competed against him, and we got the show. Couldn't believe it. I was absolutely floored. I knew we were competing against him, and when they called and they said, well, we want you to come down and do this, I went nuts. From that, just blossomed into a number of different things.
In the 70s and 80s, networks were forced to adopt winning limits to meet standards and practices guidelines. In 1972, any contestant whose total winnings reached $25,000 would have to be retired from the show. In 1984, contestants could keep up to $75,000, but no more. In 2006, with just one daytime show left, the daytime winnings limit was eliminated, most notably on a June 11, 2007 episode of The Price is Right during Bob Barker's final week, when a recreational vehicle prize on Golden Road was valued at over $100,000. One of the top two game shows of all times, The Wheel of Fortune, imposed a winnings limit of $200,000, but that was abolished in 2008. Because Wheel of Fortune hasn't offered returning champions since the mid-1990s, the winning limit is rarely reached. And back again on Limelight America with Matthew King from Game Show America. Matthew, you started your company 13 years ago, and which makes you a pioneer.
There are some other companies that do similar things to what we do. I know we weren't the first. I mean, Art James was definitely out there before we were. Somebody that wants to do a Family Feud type game, they typically have single answer or single questions with multiple answers. Well, we can't do Family Feud because Family Feud is copyrighted, trademarked, and everything. So we have developed an original game called the Hit List, and that allows us to do questions that have multiple answers. What's really fun is to see on the old Newlywed Games somebody winning that avocado refrigerator, you know. Or just the prizes were so amazing. Hey, if you want a new dishwasher and it's the most atrocious almond color you've ever seen in your life, but this was a big thing for these folks.
Some TV game shows around the world are overtly provocative, such as a game show where a naked woman is behind a screen hidden by strips of paper. Every time she answers a question wrong, a strip of paper is removed. The sheer number of game shows throughout recent history gives a clear indication of what's to come. Human nature drives us to watch others succeed and fail. Game shows will continue in one format or another so long as there are individuals sitting in front of their television set clamoring to watch them. Come on down. Why does this relic from the 1970s still grab high daytime ratings more than 35 years after it debuted? Well, with an agreeable host, contestants taken from the audience, 80 different games like Pinko and Hilo, and big prizes, there's something for everyone. The show, which debuted in 1972 and made Bob Barker a TV legend during his 35 years as the host, is actually a revival of an earlier incarnation of the show, which aired from 1956 to 1965. Since 1975, contestants have been spinning the wheel and risking bankruptcy to guess letters and complete the puzzle on the board. Contestants can buy a vowel and vie to be one of the first to solve the puzzle. The bonus round allows winners to add cars, trips, and up to $100,000 in cash. Before Pat Sajak and Vanna White took the reins in the early 1980s, the Wheel of Fortune was hosted by Chuck Woolery and Susan Stafford.
You're listening to Limelight America with Michael Drew Shaw.
Answer. This game show was ranked first in the Nielsen ratings for quiz shows for more than 1,000 weeks. Question. What is Jeopardy? With 27 daytime Emmy Awards and 37 million weekly viewers, Jeopardy has dug its heels into television history. In 2004, contestant Ken Jennings racked up an unprecedented 74-game winning streak, earning more than $2.5 million, making him the winningest contestant in game show history. The current show's been on the air since 1984 and is a revival of the original, which ran from 1964 to 75. This show originally aired as a radio quiz show starting in 1940, then crossed over to television in 1950. The show asked contestants to answer obscure, often trick questions, then, if they couldn't answer, made them suffer the consequences, often embarrassing or silly stunts. Bob Barker hosted the show from 1956 to 75, but the show never quite recovered after his departure. The show ran on and off for about 20 years, from 1950 to 1978. In What's My Line, 4 celebrity panelists tried to guess the occupation or the line of work of a 5th secret contestant by asking only yes or no questions. During the 3rd round, panelists were blindfolded and challenged to guess the identity of the mystery guest. The original run of the show, which paid players for appearances since prize money never exceeded $50, ran from 1950 to 67. But since then, several revivals have been launched. Celebrity guests have included author Gore Vidal, actor Jane Fonda, and singer Bobby Darin. Okay, we're back for a final few moments with Matthew King. First of all, before we forget, let's give you a plug, GameShowAmerica.com. Have you ever given any thought to taking this concept back to the educational system? It's a great formula.
It is a great formula. There are a number of things that schools can do to bring game shows into the classroom. There's software that they can purchase, and they can obviously use our services. They can bring us in to do things. The only downside to bringing our services in is that as compared to purchasing some software that they could use in the classroom every day, it's expensive relatively expensive to bring us in versus purchasing something. Some things that I have offered to do, and I'm talking with a few schools on, is going in and doing like guest speaking to talk to kids about the importance of communication, and really what it is that this skill, that again is not a requirement in many schools, is something that is probably the most important skill, that and being able to read and write, being able to go out there and find a job and compete in the workplace out there. So using this presentation, I would do it game show style, because at the end there's some type of reward for sitting there listening to me drone on for 45 minutes. There's so many ways that the teachers can get their folks involved. I have toyed with the idea of going back into teaching for a while. I'm still on the sub-register for a number of school districts, actually, but I haven't. I'm on the road about 200 dates a year, so I haven't had a chance to go back into the schools. But I have done some school fundraisers, and I can take the school's content and I can do things for fundraisers for the schools. And that's one thing that if there are schools out there that do want to raise money for their school, we did it for the Baraboo School District, and in 2 years raised $43,000 from just 2 shows.
You're a great entrepreneur. Matthew, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Michael.
Sydney Biddle-Barrows is an expert in experience marketing and sales. She is known today for her innovative, unorthodox approach to sales, and perhaps is best known for her reign as the Mayflower Madam when she founded and operated New York's most elite, premium-priced escort service. Sydney Biddle-Barrows, coming soon to Limelight America. Networks require game shows to be heavily monitored by their standards and practices departments. The late Merv Griffith, who was irritated by the impossibility of offering a quiz show because of the previous game show scandals, suggested a quiz show where competitors were given the answers to questions, but the contestants had to give the correct questions, and this led to the 1964 introduction of Jeopardy! Game shows originated in the 1950s along with the introduction of television into most American homes. Beginning in the 60s, game shows began offering prizes worth small cash amounts, and they began to refocus on simple questions or physical challenges. New concepts emerged in the late 60s and early 70s. The precursors of reality television were introduced in the form of dating shows, talent competition, and particularly scandalous programming which quizzed newlyweds. These marriage shows occasionally led to divorce. Television game shows enjoyed a resurgence of popularity beginning in the early 21st century. Survival games or challenges involving racing other teams around the globe led this trend, while game shows designed to insultingly eliminate contestants based on disapproval flourished. Some shows, primarily those in Asian countries, absolutely defy description. These shows can involve huge physical challenges and even potential bodily harm. This is the story of Mr. Sam, the Whiskey Man. The driving forces behind successful entrepreneurs are as varied as the entrepreneurs themselves. For some, it's the pursuit of money. For others, it's a craving for power. For still others, it's the challenge itself. But the force that drove Samuel Bronfman to build a small-town distillery into an international liquor empire was the burning desire to be socially accepted. Although he seemed to have it all, wealth, prestige, and a loving family, Bronfman, whose name in Yiddish literally means whiskey man, always felt he was an outsider whom upper-class society looked down upon because he was born poor and Jewish, and because booze and bootleggers were the foundation of his fortune. This hunger to be somebody, along with his unwavering determination that his children would never suffer the humiliation of being poor as he did, became the fire that fueled Bronfman to turn a family-owned business into a multi-billion-dollar dynasty. Bronfman's entry into the liquor business came indirectly as a hotel keeper. In the early 1900s, using the money they'd earned as horse traders, Bronfman and his brothers, Abe, Harry, and Alan, purchased several hotels throughout the prairie lands of Manitoba, Canada. Each hotel had its own bar, and the brothers quickly discovered that selling liquor was the most lucrative aspect of the hotel business. But that changed in 1915 when, prompted by the temperance movement that was spreading across Canada, bars in the prairies were banned. The Bronfman brothers almost went out of business. Their hotel simply couldn't survive without bars. But there were gaping loopholes in the new law, including one that allowed the sale of liquor from one province of Canada to another. So the versatile Bronfman and his brothers went into the mail-order business, shipping whiskey by rail. When the government banned the mail-order business but said it was legal to sell alcohol as medicine, the Bronfmans just slapped on new labels such as Rockabye Cough Cure and Liver and Kidney Cure. With the passage of the Volstead Act in 1919, making and drinking liquor became illegal in the U.S., opening up a lucrative new market. Rather than reduce alcohol consumption, prohibition seemed to stimulate it as more and more Americans succumbed to the temptation of this newly forbidden fruit. The liquor kept flowing, now controlled by gangsters. The gangsters were constantly looking for more alcohol, and guess who had it? Although the sale of liquor for use within Canada was prohibited, Canadian authorities did not ban its export to the U.S. In fact, the government almost encouraged it because of the tremendous tax revenue it generated. As the demand for alcohol in the United States grew, the brothers found themselves running short, so Sam and his brother Harry decided to make their own. Their first attempt was a disaster. The batch turned blue. Putting the debacle behind them, the brothers expanded their business by opening up export houses along the Saskatchewan-North Dakota border. They continued to experience tremendous success, but that success would not come without a price. While it was legal for the Whiskey Brothers to sell their liquor to their American partners, the booze had to be illegally smuggled across the border, a situation that forced the brothers to cut deals with gangsters. They knew they were in business with a dangerous lot, but in 1922 they discovered just how dangerous when their brother-in-law, Paul Matoff, was killed, allegedly by bootleggers. The murder smeared the family name in the press, prompting Bronfman to decide it was time to move on, to get respectable. In 1924, Bronfman arrived in Montreal, the liquor supply capital of Canada. His brothers followed, and they built a distillery just outside Montreal. Though it was a joint venture, it was Sam, now the dominant figure in the business, who ran it. But Sam wasn't satisfied with just one distillery. He wanted the means to make the best whiskey in the world. To gain capital and a source of Scottish malt whiskies to blend with his own grain alcohol, Sam formed a partnership with Scotland's Distillers Company Limited, the world's largest whiskey conglomerate. Back in Canada, Bronfman continued to expand. He purchased the prestigious Seagram & Sons distillery in 1928 and, using the new name, founded Joseph E. Seagram & Sons Incorporated. With 2 distilleries, a new name, and the aid of his Scottish partners, Bronfman had laid the groundwork for what would become the Seagram empire of today. Despite the fact that he had built Seagram with the help of his brothers, Sam decided that the business was his and his alone. Through a series of shrewd, some say ruthless maneuvers, Sam forced his brothers out of the company and declared that only his 2 sons, Edgar and Charles, would ever work for Seagram. The end of Prohibition in 1933 would create a new era of prosperity for Bronfman and Seagram. But unlike other whiskey makers, who were frantically selling any drop of booze they could get their hands on, Bronfman didn't immediately jump into the fray, a move that shocked his competitors. Bronfman believed that Americans, who were used to heavy whiskeys, would switch to lighter brands that were more refined. That meant aging his whiskey for better quality, and that took time. So, while his competitors were making millions, Bronfman held back, quietly building up his stock. The strategy worked. By 1934, Bronfman's aged blended whiskeys had become America's best sellers, and by the 1940s, Seagram was the largest distiller in both the U.S. and Canada. Sam's next venture was in construction. In 1955, he commissioned a new New York headquarters, and the Seagram building quickly became a New York landmark. Over the next decade and a half, Bronfman would gradually turn over the running of the business to his sons. But as long as he was alive, it was understood that Seagram was his company. In his later years, Bronfman would finally gain some of the acclaim and acceptance he'd longed for, including winning the Order of Canada. Today, under the guidance of Bronfman's grandson, Edgar Bronfman Jr., Seagram has expanded beyond the liquor business to become an entertainment giant, owning movie studios, music labels, and theme parks around the world. But no matter how much the company has changed, it still bears the indelible imprint of the visionary trailblazer, affectionately and respectfully referred to as Mr. Sam.
Limelight America is produced by the LA Radio Network.